3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I followed it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Rank and Review. This episode, returning guest Brock Knudsen and your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons are returning to Scary Comics. Yes, we're doing more Scary Comics, and if it's as good as it was last time, I think we're all in for a treat. As usual with Rank and Review, you're going to expect spoilers for these 6 comic book movies, and you're also going to expect frequent coarse language, probably mostly from myself. You can send me feedback at rankandreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on iTunes. You can find a page for us on Facebook. And if you leave a review on iTunes or a message or a like on Facebook, I personally will see it. And it's good for the morale. So I would appreciate that. But let's keep this train moving. And let's get into Scary Comics Volume 2. Brock Knudsen is back on my podcast. Woo! You are now listening to the 94th episode of Rank and Review. And Brock and I are going to be talking about Scary Comics once again. Last time, I bet you felt you were pretty ill-used having to review The Crow's Salvation. But this time we had a tough crop of movies. I mean, it just sort of made me think about the fact that comic books took a long time for them to sort of find their way into the culture in cinemas. There was a lot of growing pains before we got to the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
This one is a lot longer on the rank than on the review.
Right?
There's a lot of rank movies in this back.
But that makes it weirdly tough to rank, too. Like I was saying, I just recently did this Water Monsters episode, which most of the movies were bad, but I had a good time watching it. I kind of enjoyed myself. Whereas this time I had a lot of bad movies, but it was just frustrating. Partly because I do like some of these characters, and partly because I think we're spoiled by how comparatively high-quality superhero movies have come.
Well, and the funny thing, too, is we really picked like a 6 that kind of span the different time frames that these movies were made in. And I mean, like, Darkman's a perfect example. Like that movie was made, was that like 90 or 90?
I think it was 90.
1990. 90, right?
I think so, yeah.
And right, like you think about that, that's like, is that pre-Burton Batman? Or
that's
right around
right
Burton
after
Batman?
Burton's Batman. That's like
right?
Very close.
So like that was a whole new, like really before that, the only, like you had Superman, like the Christopher Reeve Superman, which a lot of people really hold up, but if you watch it, it's a crazy movie. Like
that last
there's this
act
crazy
is a mess.
Lois Lane scene where she like recites a poem to him in the sky and it's all fuzzy. It's the weirdest damn thing. You're watching it and you're like, what is this? Anyway, but yeah, like it's almost like there was like movies in the 80s, like superhero movies in the 80s to 90s, and then then there's like the action superhero movies, like your Blade, like it was a Wesley Snipes vehicle that was superhero themed.
Yeah.
And that made it okay,
And it was
so
almost...
I'm excited to talk about this because there's a whole there's a whole progression of, like you say, how we got to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there's like there's some real bumps in the road that, and you know, it was interesting too in preparing for this. I kind of wikied a bunch of the different movies, and it's like almost every movie, it's like started off production problems,
Yeah.
budget shortfalls, filming over budget, and you know, even just thinking about that right now as I was looking at my list, I was like, that makes some of these things a lot more forgivable, because I really think there were some of these that it was really just like it was this passion project that they just got in over their heads, and the studios came in and went chop 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 chop
Yeah.
chop, you know,
Well,
and what we got to see was what was left.
in this age of creating cinematic universes, it wasn't a guaranteed hit, you know.
No.
Like Blade was not a lock on paper. Spawn was not a lock on paper. They're not going to be able to recruit A-list Hollywood talent necessarily easily, or if they do, they'll get one and have to fill out the rest of the parts, right?
Yeah.
It's practically like they have a whole crew of James Bonds. You know, you release a new James Bond movie, even if it sucks, it's going to open huge. They weren't
Yeah.
there yet. They were trying to
No.
get to that place. So yes, I think that I can be forgiven in that the form hadn't sort of found its feet yet. But at the same time, I'm gonna have to be real about the quality. Like people say, we needed to work our way through Raimi's Spider-Man movies to get to where we are with the Avengers movies and, you know, the new Spider-Mans. I think that they're enjoyable to watch, but they're already very dated films, and that's something that I've come across in a lot of movies, but specifically in special effects, summer blockbusters, extravaganza type of stuff. They age very quickly. And we're definitely going to have to talk about that for a couple of these movies.
Well, and two, right? Like a lot of these movies predate the Marvel DC re-grab of their content, of their IP, right? Like, you know, like even to this day, Fox and Sony still own Spider-Man and X-Men because they keep pumping out the movies, right?
Yeah.
But for the longest time, a lot of these properties, this IP was held by these weird studios that had picked them up, or, you know, like this one had bought it, and then they got like I'm trying to think which one of them. There's one of them that it was like Lionsgate bought it from Alliant, but it was mostly made under one, and you know, then they had to go through two or three because they just bought the IP out, and all of these were like these small indie. Like it was just comic book just didn't have the cred, and when Marvel took that all in house and created their Marvel movie production company, and then they own their IP and they can put whatever they want in their movies. That was really what kind of totally flipped open the cinematic universe. And that's when we started seeing quality, because they could put their quality stories into a quality movie, not just, you know, have to dealing with, you know, oh, the director wants it this way, the production wants it this way, it needs to have this in it, we can't not have this in it. You know, his best friend can't be black, he has to be white because, you know, Hollywood.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of these like yada, yada, yadas that like hamstrung some of these. I mean, not to say that, you know, given any extra money that some of these would have been any better. I think there's some real flaws in here. But yeah, like, again, like you say, it wasn't a lock. They couldn't just walk in and write themselves a check.
Yeah.
It had, like, some of these were made for a really phenomenally low amount of money,
considering what they were trying to accomplish. And like before Batman came out, like just a couple years before Batman, George Lucas laid that huge egg with Howard the Duck. Now, you could argue that was like way too weird a property to open with, and I think you'd be right in saying that. But I was quoted on this show before Guardians of the Galaxy opened as saying, I'm worried that the cinematic universe of Marvel is going too weird too soon. Like I said that when I was talking about James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy. I said I would go see it, and I was excited to see it, but I wondered if maybe they were going too far too soon. Well, apparently not, because Guardians was huge business. So this podcast is going to be dedicated to the days before Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
To like, I can think the dark times in the 90s and the aughts. The 90s was when I did a lot of comic book collecting, but it's also kind of known as a dark time for comic books, as in the quality and just the business was getting a little bit shaky. And you get into the aughts, and people stop a lot, for the large sake, even buying comic books. They'll buy the compendiums, or they will read their comic books online. But the idea of going like weekly to your comic book shop, like everything's changed, like in every other medium.
Mm-hmm.
Superheroes survive, comic books survive, but it's been a rocky road, and I think that the movies reflect this. I'm really looking forward to this episode. I think it'll be strong, but I promise you, I will let you get a word in edgewise here at some point. Okay, so we have I watched the director's cut of Spawn. I don't know if you watched the director's cut or not, but I'm not sure if those 3 minutes are going to make the difference. We have we have Blade, starring Wesley Snipes. We have The Punisher, the Thomas Jane version of The Punisher from, I think, 2004, I want to say. Not the Dolph Lundgren Punisher, and not the Punisher with Ray Stevenson, was it?
Is that the War Crimes?
Yeah, or War
War Journal.
Warzone. Punisher Warzone. Yeah.
All right.
We have the one original property of this list, which in a way might give it a bit of an unfair advantage, but Darkman. That was not a comic book that was being adapted. That was Sam Raimi saying, I'm going to make you a comic book movie to prove to the world that I'm the guy to direct Spider-Man. But we'll discuss that when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
We have Nicolas Cage starring as Ghost Rider. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with the most recent of these, I believe, Jonah Hex, starring the recently Academy Award nominated at that time, Josh Brolin. That is the tough collection of comic book movies that Brock Knudsen and I are going to talk about this episode. Is there anything you want to say before we jump in?
No, let's have at it.
Let's do it.
It's time.
Imagine a substance with the power to destroy humanity. Imagine a creature insane enough to use it. Imagine a hero on the verge of creation. From flesh to steel.
You must visualize your objective.
From blood
Go!
to blade.
Don't get cocky. You have a lot more to learn.
From man to spawn.
Peekaboo. I see you.
We have harvested the ultimate weapon. Makes the Ebola virus look like a skin rash.
Congratulations. I say destroy the cosmos, ask questions later.
Who are you?
This is just what they want. You're playing their game.
Then I'll play dirty.
So in the 1990s, as I said in the introduction, I did collect comic books. And in the early 90s, I don't think there was a bigger name in comics than Todd McFarlane.
No.
If there is, nothing immediately jumps to mind. When I knew him, or what I collected of him, he just did this sort of new version of Spider-Man. And the thing about his art was just how much he filled the frame with bizarre details, even details that didn't seem completely necessary. With Spider-Man, the web was all over the page, and with Spawn, his personal creation, the cape and the chains are just everywhere, filling the frame. And Spawn as a concept, as an idea of, the Hell's sort of leader of the Hell's Army, sort of trapped on Earth, trying to do good, but full of this evil supernatural power. Seems like a property that's full of potential. Add to this, Academy ignored, unfortunately, but I think award-worthy actor Martin Sheen signs on to be a villain, saying that he'd always wanted to do a superhero movie. So you got the most popular name in comics, you got a cool, badass-looking superhero, and you got Martin Sheen to bounce off for your villain. This movie's going to be awesome, right? Right, Brock? Right?
I have a bit of a soft spot in my heart for this movie.
Really? Okay.
Because I do feel like its biggest fault, well, I mean, aside from John Leguizamo, who I love, but is just so scene killing.
Scary
over and
for the
over
wrong
and over and over
reasons
again.
is what comes to mind, Scary for the wrong reason.
Yeah, like if you're afraid of clowns, yeah, okay. But yeah, just like so many just terrible potty joke lines, and just I remember when we were talking about Sin City in our last one that we did. One of your points that I've actually really quite liked was that it's like there are lines that work on paper,
Right.
but they don't work on screen,
Correct.
and so many of the things that John Leguizamo is doing as the Violator are like that. They're lines that would seem creepier on page, but when you have someone actually saying it, it doesn't click. It doesn't evoke that same thing. And maybe it's just the way his voice or whatever. Maybe it's just a failing of production to add those things to it. But whatever, for whatever reason, like there's just every scene he's in, you just want him off the screen.
I will preface this by saying that I don't think John Leguizamo is a terrible actor. I've seen him do good work, and I've heard a lot of people defend his work in this, but I'm going to sit here and not defend it. I mean, the idea of this character, this hugely powerful demonic creature that's sort of been forced and squished into this ridiculous shape of a clown, was sort of a cool idea. At no point is Leguizamo scary. He seems to be playing up sort of the clownish, goofball aspect of it, like you say.
Yeah.
And he waits for the special effects to take over, and he'll become the Violator monster when he needs to be scary. But as soon as he becomes a Violator monster, he's clearly just not John Leguizamo anymore. He doesn't speak.
Yeah.
He just becomes this vicious thing. And I didn't see that potential in him, and it rang discordant. I'm just going to do a little bit of service to the plot here. Michael J. White is our main character. Al Simmons, thank you. Al Simmons is working for this clearly transparently evil dude who played not very well, I'm not happy to say, by Martin Sheen. He's basically a hired assassin who suddenly has lost his taste for it. And gets double-crossed by these transparently evil people. Now, when I say transparently evil, what do I mean by that? Like, do I mean he has a beard so dark and short that it looks painted on his face? Well, yes. Do I mean that he has, like, a super haughty woman who hangs out in his office dressed like a supervillain? Why, yes. Do I mean that he actually, like, puts a cigarette out in an ashtray full of scorpions for some reason? Yes. Like... If
the other
movie
thing that
had a
kind of
sense
that
of
I found
humor,
just amazing about it, it's like there's this double cross scene where they set him up. He's stealing this ludicrous story where he's stealing a virus from a North Korean virus facility, and it's a double cross. And he shows up, and Martin Sheen and the assassin chick are there to personally double cross him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guy's like a desk jockey. Like, I mean, obviously they're saying, oh, he used to be Mr. Dangerous and whatever, but it's just like, that's the only time he ever shows any flash of dangerousness other than the fact that he's this puppet master, this spider at the center of his web, always, doing these things. And it's like, you went to all this trouble to try and you had to get this, lone assassin to go in and steal all this stuff, but then you guys were able to go into, and it's like,
I think
it's just
what we're
needlessly complex.
We need to find your tone. Like, what's the tone of this movie? I'm trying to describe the plot, and so far it sounds like it's super hella dark, right? An assassin, he gets burned to death, he gets sent to hell, he has to make a deal with the devil, or is forced to make a deal with the devil to both get vengeance, but at the price of leading hell's army at the time of the apocalypse. All of this sounds way more interesting than this movie is, right? And you need to strike a tone. Like, is this sort of a light, goofy romp, or is this a hella dark, demonic, almost horror movie? And this has no idea what it is. When John Leguizamo's here, it's a goofy comedy, and when Spawn is suffering, it's supposed to be very, very intense and real. Anyway, Spawn has returned to Earth. He has to figure out what his powers are, which is something I also want to talk to you about, what his powers actually are. And does he have any humanity left? Can he reconnect with his former family? And can he, get vengeance? All of these questions are answered in not very interesting ways, in my opinion.
And it's the story just clumps along from bad plot to bad plot. I mean, it's got this. He lives in this street scene where it's like this.
Lives in an alley, basically.
Shitty alley. Sorry, language warning.
No,
this
we're all good.
crappy alley, filled with really not even like it's like, oh, all the homeless people that you could ever think of live in this alley. Like there's hookers, there's
All the friendly homeless people,
street
though.
waifs, and yeah, but they're with their family kind of thing, but it looks it looks like a soundstage,
Yeah.
like a really badly done soundstage, even just like that. Like it doesn't look like a real street. It looks like, yeah, like it just looks like you turn the corner and all of a sudden you're going to be behind the cardboard, or behind the the pasteboard or whatever.
It's
There's this whole like protector of the street, which is from the comics. I mean, and I don't know if you've ever watched there's like an MTV animated series that is about 1 billion times better
right.
than what we see on screen. And again, like they're trying to cram this massive story arc into 2 hours. And I reading about it, just like how much the production budget was. The original production budget was like 40 million, but everything just ballooned out of control when they started trying to do the special effects. They had like special effects guys that were like doing their first work since they quit ILM, and they did and there are some groundbreaking special effects, like for the time when this was made, like 1997. There's some great CGI in this.
There are a few moments of very, very good CGI. I think that when John Leguizamo turns into the creature he turns into is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, though, the hellscape, and specifically the devil himself, looks fucking terrible. And even by the standards of the day of the primitive CGI, it looks terrible. Like, I don't understand how the Violator demon and the demon that represents the devil exist in the same movie. The devil doesn't even move his mouth when he speaks. It's a terrible rendering of, like, it's one of the least frightening depictions of the devil that I've ever seen. Like, it's comically bad. It's made worse by the few moments where the CGI is pretty decent. The CGI of the cape, and I understand that they were trying to sort of emulate McFarlane, kind of drives me crazy, because you can tell it's just not part of the frame. You can tell none of the actors are seeing the cape, So
here's an interesting fun fact.
Okay.
More than half of the final effects shots were delivered 2 weeks before the film's debut.
Yeah. See, and I bet you a lot of that was hell. I bet you a lot of that was hell.
Yeah, that's pretty awful.
There's like scenes where they show the devil's army sort of like rising up from above the flames, and it's not for a second convincing. Like,
no,
Lawnmower Man level crap. Like, just no good.
Well, and it's kind of, when you think about it, like, what was this? So, what was Toy Story, like 92?
I want to say more in the mid-90s, but I don't know. I don't have that information in front of me.
But definitely this movie in 97 would have come out after Toy Story. Just to put a what could have been done versus what was done. But yeah, no, like the cape is fantastic. Although there's this whole thing where all of a sudden right in the middle, like he crashes down through this window and his cape is doing all this crazy stuff. And you're like, wow, that's new.
Yeah.
I didn't even know he had a cape.
What?
And they're like, oh, your powers will just activate when you need them. I'm like, you could have told us that, and then we'd have at least gone, oh, he's got a cape and it does crazy stuff. Like, it comes out of nowhere,
and
right?
we don't know what his powers are. Like, at one point he's being charged by a vehicle and the cape suddenly turns like super, like a spike in the road made of metal and stops the vehicle. There's one point where he removes this bullshit plot device from Martin Sheen's heart so that he has it rigged so if he dies that the plague will be unleashed upon the world. So he uses his hell powers to remove the device from his heart somehow. Like, we have no idea what Spawn's powers are. Spawn doesn't know what his powers are until they happen. I don't care about Spawn getting back together with his family. I don't care about his ex-partner with the bad 90s goatee. I don't care how this movie ends. I just want it to end. Like, I hate being this mean about movies, and like, I'd love to sugarcoat it and say, you know what, there's a couple of action sequences that really do it for me, but I was shocked at how, like, I didn't have great memories of it, but watching it again now, it was so much worse than I remember it, and I think I know the moment where it hit rock bottom for me. There's a scene where John Leguizamo, I'm not going to get the line word for word, but it's delivered to Martin Sheen. If somebody kills you, we'll have to start the apocalypse now. and then there's a shot of Martin Sheen. And for a split second, you're reminded that this great actor is stuck in the middle of this absolutely fucking terrible movie. They're constantly reminding you of the plot because it makes no sense. John Leguizamo speaks his plan out loud to nobody repeatedly. There's not a lot of... Like, there's a cool makeup job on Spawn, but there's not a lot of expression to him. I don't think that Michael J. White sucks, but, I mean, he's just lost.
There's a lot of bad
He's
Power
lost.
Ranger face, too.
Yeah.
I agree.
Like,
and there's no pathos. I mean, I just don't care about anybody in that movie at all. And you're kind of like, maybe they'll do the plague.
Yeah.
Maybe that might be kind of interesting. Like you're almost like cheering for the apocalypse to happen, just because it'd be different than what you're seeing.
that might have been a more interesting movie. And again,
I might watch that actually.
It's weird because Spawn is, at least was a hugely popular figure. I'm sort of surprised that they haven't got around to doing another try. Maybe the animated show just did it well enough that they thought not to bother, but it's brutal. It's a brutal movie. So I can't even, as a guilty pleasure, recommend Spawn. But
here's a neat. Sorry, I got my Wikipedia open on it. Did you know that McFarlane sold the rights to do it for $1? Just to make sure that he could get it done.
Wow. Well.
And but he got the merchandising rights, which actually I bet you made more money than the movie.
The merchandise is probably still making money.
So there's a ton of like crazy Spawn figures with like all the different whatevers that you could get.
Not that McFarlane's hurting for money, but that's got to... I have to believe on some level he's disappointed with the finished product, but he does a commentary track on the DVD. I could listen to it to find out, but that would mean I'd have to watch Spawn again. So I don't think I'm going to do that.
It's 2 hours of him just going...
I certainly hope so, because that's how I felt watching it.
For thousands of years, they have existed among us.
You keep your eyes open. They're everywhere. Chances are you've seen them yourself and didn't know it.
A secret nation.
Our livelihood depends on our ability to blend in.
With a lust for power.
We should be ruling the humans. These people are our food.
They've got their claws into everything. Politics, finance, real estate. There's a war going on out there. He makes the weapons. I use them.
Now, one will lead them to conquer mankind.
Tonight, the age of man comes to an end. We're gonna be gods.
And one will try to stop him dead.
There are worse things out tonight than vampires.
Like what?
Like me.
Half human.
Blade's mother was attacked by a vampire while she was pregnant.
Half immortal.
You got the best of both worlds. All our strengths, none of our weaknesses.
He is their greatest fear and our only hope.
It's open season on all vampires.
So, do you want to play a fun game, Brock, with Wesley Snipes?
Oh, God.
Take a look at...
I don't want to play a game with Wesley Snipes. He'll steal my money.
If you look at his IMDb page, look at the movies that he made before the Blade trilogy, and think of how many of those movie titles that you recognize and remember. Then take a look at all of the movies that he's made subsequent to the Blade movies and ask yourself how many of those movies you've heard of or remember. The sad, brutal truth about Wesley Snipes is that once upon a time, he was a really, up-and-coming, pedigreed, Oscar-worthy actor who was on the verge of being a huge superstar. And Blade, coming out in 1998, was a monster hit that would add to this. It's directed by Stephen Norrington, who would go on to bring us the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So, ouch. And it's written by troublesome figure to me, David S. Goyer. David S. Goyer really impressed me when he co-wrote the screenplay to Dark City. And subsequent to this, he's done almost exclusively drag. He's attached himself to a lot of, we're going to talk about some of them here too, a lot of comic books, and he did help out writing the Nolan Batman trilogy. He did help out in a few other places. He worked on the Ghost Rider movies, and here he is writing the Blade screenplay. There was a time where Blade made me really angry, where I thought, I don't understand why everybody likes this movie so much. I don't get it. It's all style, no substance. It's sort of the definition, to me, as a style as substance movie. But I got to take Blade into consideration with these 5 other movies that we're watching. And what Blade has that definitely Spawn didn't is momentum. And special effects that may be a little bit dated, but that are at least exciting. The movie is...
And consistent.
Yeah. The movie may be stupid, yes. It Wesley Snipes might be hilariously, over the top as Blade. I think he is pushing it. But it is a comic book movie. But Blade, in a lot of ways, has improved in my esteem over time. That said, even though I like Blade today way more than when I first saw it in 1998, I have a real hard time saying that it's a good movie. I think it's a sound off type of movie, or I'm feeling weird and nostalgic for some reason. I want to watch Blade, but I think I reviewed Blade 2 on the podcast in the past, and I said then someday they'll remake Blade and do it justice. But for 1998 swing, I guess Blade is moderately passable, but it's not something I can get passionate about. But by all means, Brock, talk me into this.
I don't know that I can really defend this movie a ton. It's interesting. You said look at the IMDb, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, oh yeah, oh no,
right?
Oh no. But yeah, I don't know. I've mentioned this before. I think we were talking before we were recording. One of the things that kind of rankles a little bit with Blade is it doesn't feel like a superhero movie or a comic book movie. It feels like a Wesley Snipes movie that's got a vampire theme.
Yeah.
And I mean, some people, I guess part of it too is that there people who, I guess people our age will remember this. People younger might not necessarily understand the whole action movie genre from the late 80s to the 90s, right? The Schwarzenegger Commando and
the age of the hard
Rambo
action picture.
Yeah, and so it wasn't, you didn't care. You didn't go, okay, well, let's see. This looks like it's an interesting piece about a Vietnam War vet dealing with his issues. This is the new Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who cares what he's doing? Who cares what Van Damme really is? Yeah, he's a martial artist,
asses will be kicked.
That's the hook.
Will be kicked.
Yeah, it's details, right?
Yeah.
It was just details for how this movie is going to be about. And Wesley Snipes, I mean, obviously he was even in the Expendables 3. The Expendables movies are just camera pictures of what those were back then. That's why they're so popular, even though they're complete garbage. And God, I loathe the Expendables movies so much. Really wish I had the hours of my life I spent watching the first one back, and I've never even. Anyway,
but that's
where action heroes could die.
That's the thing. There was a time where Wesley Snipes was huge. The fact that he's being included in the Expendables almost sounded like they were giving him an olive branch. He's been delegated to direct to video. Apparently, his ego got so big on Blade that he believed that not only was he as cool as Blade, but he was so cool he didn't have to pay his taxes.
Well, but that's what I mean, right? You see him on screen, and you're like, I don't know if that's the character
or if that's Wesley Snipes.
Just Wesley Snipes, right? And the same with Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone. You're not saying, oh, I'm so engrossed by their character. You're like, I'm reciting the lines of the guy who I am, but
that's the thing. Schwarzenegger is make fun of but I mean, Wesley Snipes did movies like Jungle Fever and The Water Dance and New Jack City. He has real game, and I think he got to this point where he became the superstar, and some people don't handle fame well. So here he is in the center of this huge action movie. Another, interestingly, I guess, black anti-superhero. The second in a row that we've been reviewing here. But at the time, I think it's kind of a big deal, you know? It's an R-rated superhero movie when R-rated superhero movies were not super popular. The story seems serviceable enough. I remember watching it this time thinking it could almost be a spin-off of the Underworld franchise. In the way that the whole system of the vampires work behind the scenes, and you know, some of them feed on humans, some of them don't. Some of them are good vampires, some of them are bad vampires. Blade's origin. I was not a really big Blade fan as far as comic books, but I'll go through it real quick for the sake of the podcast. When Blade was in his mother's womb, she was attacked by a vampire. He believes that she died, but well, that's another great twist of the movie. He is born, and he's got some of the strength and powers of a vampire, but he also has a few other things that vampires can't. Most notably, he can walk during the day. The vampires will refer to him as the Daywalker. He's got a real grudge against vampires, so he and his buddy Chris Christopherson like to kill him some vampires. They're counterposed against Stephen Dorff, who was valid, I guess, in the 90s, but less so with each passing decade.
I like to refer to him as the poor man's Christian Slater.
Yeah, that's exactly what he sort of was at the time. I remember he did this movie that was really cool in 1993 or whatever it was, SFW, but is just absolutely cringeworthy to watch now. And he's still doing that sort of 90s fashion victim thing as the super evil vampire. But he also seems to be having fun playing that role. I mean, it's passable. So we have these two great powers that are going to clash. Stephen Dorff wants to use Blade's blood to, you know, bring about a new age of vampire dominance in the globe. And a bunch of kung fu fighting happens. That's basically the movie. I mean, am I underserving the plot?
No, I think that's pretty much plot, you know, air quotes included. I really think that it needs to be noted just how profound the effect that Chris Christopherson has on the success of movies. Like, he just kills anything he's in. Like, anything that you watch with him, you're just like, the hell is he doing in this movie? And oh yeah, there it goes off the cliff.
It's funny too, because he is so clearly killed in this movie. Like, it's ridiculous how dead he is in this movie, and they bring him back for the next movie. It's just for no reason. It's absurd.
Well, yeah. Anyway, I just
script level problems. The one character that looks like she could almost be a romantic interest for Blade, except for Blade's too cool for romance. She gets attacked by Donald Logue vampire. We're going to talk about Donald Logue again later when we're talking about Ghost Rider. But they think that they've saved her, but then they haven't saved her, but then they have saved her, but then she goes away. Like, I honestly don't know what the fuck she was doing in the movie in a lot of ways. And I got to go back to this issue where Stephen Dorff drops this bomb on Blade that not only is his mom alive, but she's a vampire and she's working with them. Like, that's this thing that comes, like, late in the game.
Yeah.
I think that if you have that card to play against Blade, like...
Well, he kind of uses that to get him to the point where he can capture him to use his blood in his ritual that... You know, and that's the other thing. It's like, it's this MacGuffin of this, you know, vampire ritual that will, you know, bring about the blood god and all this, which is kind of a cool story, but, you know, and then it's like, oh, but I'm a vampire and I used a computer. You know, and all the other vampires are like, this could never have happened. And they're all like walking. It's just, it's so contrived. And you're like, oh, these are the most powerful vampires or whatever. And it's like, and my flunkies will push you to your spot where you will stand, and that will be, you know, and you're just like,
Yeah.
Well, then,
Like, Stephen Dorff's character introduces himself as, I'm a dick. I don't trust anything you guys say, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get power. And then the powers that be, all these super smart vampires who are running the show just kind of shrug, well, that's kind of interesting. And then all seem bewildered when all of a sudden he starts doing all this terrible, evil shit. Like, the vampires are such punks in this movie.
well, yeah, like except for him, like he's got his shit figured out, and they are just like they're like senior citizens. They're like senior citizens.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the deep metaphor.
Yeah. Well,
that the new breed will understand technology, and that will be,
or just this idea that like Blade has his poop in the group, right? Like he's got his shit together, but literally nobody else in the world does. Not only can he kill 100 vampires, but he's gonna look cool while he does it, and he's gonna say a really, really bizarre one-liner. I actually wanted to ask you, there's some line he gives about there's always some fucker wanting to skate uphill. Does this ring a bell?
Yeah,
they do this.
I do remember that
big zoom in on. What in the goddamn world is that supposed to mean? Like,
well, you'd be
there's these moments where he'll do a
doing
kill.
it more difficult than it needs to be. But what the fuck does some guy who was born as a vampire know about skating? Right? Like, it was obviously he speaks Russian though. If they ended at the end of the movie, so
that line in particular though, because they hit it so hard. Like, I got the feeling like David S. Goyer must have really thought he fucking nailed it on that one. It just was nonsense. And every now and then he'll do a specific move, or he'll kill a vampire, and he'll like sort of go, yeah, like to congratulate himself. And
but that's what I mean about the action movie, right? Like I mean, I'm just looking over here, right? It was right after White Man Can't Jump, right? At that point, he became an they decided it was good because he did Passenger 57. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, vaguely.
I don't know if it's been on here. It's like Air Force One, but it's the black hero version. I don't know. I don't want to sound racist, but it's just whatever.
Die Hard on a
I
plane.
can differentiate it. And but there's this part in it, and it's like he's like, "Do you play roulette?"
Always bet on black.
Yeah, always bet on black. And I'm just like, they contrived that entire scene for that line.
But
like
it's a lame line, but I guess it makes sense. Like, he's the one black guy on the plane and he's kicking everybody's ass. So I guess it makes sense. There's always some motherfucker trying to skate up. That just seems like a non sequitur to me.
No, I agree, but it's in that vein, right? Pardon the pun, but it's in that action movies have those hard stop
moments
where they give the snappy one-liner. I used to see you, right? Like,
yeah, but that's just it. It's sort of like pausing for laughter in a comedy show, but there's no laughter. Like, you're holding for a laugh that's not coming. So basically what I'm saying is anytime they stop to talk in Blade, it kind of starts falling apart. When Blade's killing a bunch of people, there's a bunch of blood like coming out of a sprinkler system, and there's a bunch of techno music playing, and people are dying. It is, I guess, superficially entertaining in a, shaking your keys for a little kid type of way. And there are moments where I see hints of how this could be a really good movie if someone took it a little bit more seriously. There's this weird scene where they go to this vampire library, and there's this huge, fat, crazy-looking vampire blob sitting there, and they torture it with a light for information. That scene seemed ripped out of a different, more interesting movie. It was also kind of absurd, but
and it's that assumption of weird, like the vampire legends, and the librarian scene, which also got spattered with anytime there's anything like fat or whatever, and there's always like fart jokes, and like it's got to happen. It's just
yeah.
I think that was the 90s too, right? They had to spice those things in a bit. You couldn't put that on screen without kicking it once or twice, right?
So in the end, I don't have a lot of good things to say about Blade, but I now understand why it was popular, and I kind of can enjoy it in sort of the way I will enjoy a music video. It's probably going to rank artificially high on this list, but I'm not only going to say, just here for the record, to avoid Blade, but you can skip this whole Blade trilogy. They will do it again
Oh,
on
God.
a TV show or on a rebooted movie, and I guarantee you it will be better than this was.
The future was something my family would never see. They thought they murdered me. They were wrong. They were dead wrong. That man must die. Don't do it!
Don't let your memories kill you.
They can't kill me. I'm already dead.
Punisher is actually a comic title that I'm not unfamiliar with. I actually did read some of the classic Punishers when I was back in a kid. He certainly wasn't one of my favorites, but, I thought it was moderately cool. This is a bluntly simple sort of revenge type of character. It's, take Death Wish, only instead of him just going out on a parade of vengeance to get his family back, he puts on a costume and just decides to take the death of his family out on every criminal everywhere, but in a very unequivocal sort of way. I think that's the interesting line that The Punisher drops, to be called a comic book movie and maybe not a superhero movie. Because I don't know that it's fair to call The Punisher a superhero. He's a vigilante, and he's a murderer. And we like him? Question mark. So
not much.
The idea is, a well used one. Like, the idea of some guy on a righteous quest to avenge the death of his family is as old as time itself. This one just has the costume and his military history, and they just sort of add up the degree of badassery. We also have John Travolta playing the bad guy, and Thomas Jane being our titular Punisher. What this movie does with the comic book, at least as I remember it, is up the ante to a ridiculous degree. As I remember it, his origin in the comic book was his wife and his son were killed by mafia. It was like a professional mafia hit. They were gunned down.
Crossfire, not even intent.
Right.
Which is right off the gate, one of the things that I hate about this movie.
So there you go. But in this movie, because I don't know, I guess the director wanted everything all the way to fucking 10, it's not good enough that just his wife and child dies. The Punisher is originally an undercover cop and doing the sting, and during the big bust, John Travolta's son is killed. And interestingly, it's John Travolta's wife who gives the order that this man needs to be killed and to suffer ridiculously. And I do mean ridiculously. They literally come to his family reunion and execute every single member of his family, run over his wife and child, and then shoot him and throw him into the ocean. It's like Hollywood decided the death of the wife and child not good enough. And you know what? If this movie was going to be a hard, brutal, uncompromising revenge thriller, I might have shrugged it off and went with it. But we were talking earlier about tone. This Punisher movie is a movie that starts that brutally, that horrifyingly, and then the Punisher moves into an apartment building and he makes friends with a big fat guy and a cute blonde chick and a guy with a bunch of piercings, and there's a bunch of fish out of water comedy, and all of a sudden this tale of revenge is set against the backdrop of a buddy comedy. And the tone jump is so extreme that it breaks the movie a little bit for me.
Oh, I completely agree. The funny thing is too, because a lot of these movies I watched, kind of after work or whatever. So there was a couple of points where I was like, I got to break this up. I got to stop and watch the rest of this movie,
Later.
The next day kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
And Punisher was one of those ones I kind of was like, no, I'm going to fall asleep or I'm not going to, which is right there. But I mean, it was like 2 a.m. I'm watching it at 2 a.m. I'm going to fall asleep, watching anything at that point. And I kind of was like, oh, how much is left? About an hour. And I'm like, eh. So I paused it and I kind of go back to it the next day and I'm like, okay, yeah, here we are, right back where we are. And it was like right before the kind of the big attack on the on the apartment block where there's that giant
Russian dude
guy that, and I mean, up until that point is kind of like you say, the crazy. It's like, oh, look who moved into apartment 6.
Yeah.
The
day a vigilante moved into our building.
And the transition between and that fight transitions the movie. It snaps it back to like the most brutal, crazy crap that you've ever seen again. Like right out of that, like all that was meted out on his family gets brought back, and then some on all the bad guys.
Yeah.
And it starts with the Russian scene, but it's funny because even that Russian scene, while he's in this just frankly brutal fight. Aside from there's points in it that are quirky and goofy, but when it gets down to brass tacks, that is a nasty fight. There's some nasty stuff done to people in that fight.
But they don't let you take it seriously. They won't let you take it seriously. Yeah. All the other tenants are listening to this music, so they don't hear the terrible fight going on. And I think it's supposed to be funny or clever or amusing or something, but the two things being juxtaposed do not work at all.
Yeah. And then, so then he finishes the fight with the Russian guy, breaks his neck, jumping him down the stairs in a somewhat anticlimactic way. Other guys show up, and it turns into a friggin' torture scene, which was hard to watch. It's right back to that brutality, and it was just, exactly. It's so jarring.
Are you a cutesy buddy comedy, or are you a grim as shit revenge picture? Because you got to pick one and go with it. I'm sorry, you cannot be both.
Well, and the whole weird setup plot that he Nancy Drews around to convince the John Travolta that his wife is having an affair with his friends so that he'll murder them both. That kind of convoluted shit, I hate it. I hate it in a movie like this. It kind of leads back to this other thing. There's major plot point right from the beginning that I frickin' hate.
Right.
And it's this, he's a Navy SEAL. So then he decided to dial back his life and, go for something, less, I don't know, murdering people and swimming in the ocean, and decided to become a deep undercover drug operative. That's a career path that just flows, right? You just leave the army and all of a sudden you're a hardcore deep cover detective in a mafia.
No.
Not even, and I mean, he's Italian and he's trying to work against the Italian mafia, and he's posing as an East German guy. Because he doesn't, it's stupid. It makes no sense. As much as I thought that the whole murdering the whole family thing was that was a brutal scene, and it was very effective to, set up this vendetta that he goes on. It's a retribution of a retribution of a retribution, right? He legitimately did, was involved as a cop. And I'm not saying that cops deserve to get killed if they're involved in things, but that sting went bad and that kid did die.
Yeah. Where does the cycle of violence end, brother? Where does it end?
You took the risk.
Yeah.
You went deep undercover, and your family paid the price for that.
Yeah.
So you own some of that. You made that decision to be that cop.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that is this, I'm going to stake out your fucking car and I'm going to get you fake parking tickets and this Nancy Drew bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's I'm sorry, that shit can only work in a stupid movie. That somebody goes, and because he's super jealous and this is how it's going to work and that's how it's going to be and blah, blah, blah.
Here's what I will say. This is going to sound like I'm defending Punishers. So let me temper that. But I think what they were going for is he saw his family destroyed in front of him before he was defeated, right? Or before he was killed, in quotation marks, and made to become the Punisher. And what he's trying to do to the John Travolta character is give him the same sort of experience. Only instead of sending goons to kill all the guy's family or killing all the guy's family himself, he tricks him into destroying, into self-destructing, right? That's what they're going for. The problem is twofold. A, that's stupid. And B, John Travolta does not bring the menace as a villain at all. He's not frightening. He can yell at his underlings and bark orders, but I don't believe he's scary. I don't believe if it came down to a showdown between him and Thomas Jane, it would even be fucking close. He is 100% easily manipulated perfectly into the trap. And Will Patton, who I think is a really strong character actor, who plays his right-hand man and best friend, who somehow John Travolta has missed the fact, even though they've been friends their entire life, is gay, right? But believes wholesale that he would, try and steal his wife from him. None of that makes sense.
That I will say this in like giving credit where due. The scene where he knifes him to death was harsh. That was that and the running down the family were the two scenes that I was like, ooh.
Yeah. But they were
a little hard to,
they belonged in a different movie, clearly.
I
don't know if it's studio interference. Maybe the studio said we need this to be lighter. And like I said, they got interesting actors. Ben Foster, I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Foster. He plays the kid with all of the piercings that gets tortured.
Oh yeah, he was good.
Yeah, and he's a good actor, and he's gone on to other brighter things. Yeah. But and like I say, Will Patton, when he gets stabbed by John Travolta and he looks at his best friend and just says, "What are you doing?"
Why are you killing me?
Yeah.
What he says, those are his final words. And it's just like...
It's brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, it's wasted. And then we go to the final stupidity. I don't believe in fighting the plot, the guy decides to wear a skull costume and avenge crime because that's the decision he made. We can make that. But he explodes John Travolta in this huge car lot that he's primed with explosions so that the fire that burns makes the shape of a skull that you could only see if you were looking from a helicopter above it. Who was that for? Who was that for? And again, does it fit with the serious tone of the movie? Or does it even fit with the goofy tone of the movie?
Well,
what is this?
He doesn't even give him as hard a death as he probably deserves.
Yeah.
I don't really like The Punisher. I didn't really like the comics. I don't like the whole idea of
He's a vigilante. That's what's sort of interesting about it, though.
I don't get on. I like superheroes that are superheroes. I don't like, and even if they kill people, I don't really care that much. But I don't. He's just a fucking soldier that goes around killing people.
Yeah.
And I know there's probably more to it than that, but I just never grooved on it. It was never my thing growing up. I like Batman, right? Batman's principled.
Yeah.
Punisher is completely not, and that's brutal. But when he wire ropes John Travolta to the back of his fucking car and starts to drive off, I'm like, oh shit, he's gonna drag him to death.
No,
that is hard ass shit. And then it's pops out and the explosion, and I'm like, the fuck is this shit?
Well, he was already probably mortally wounded, and he did die with the realization that he'd killed his wife and his best friend for no reason. So, I mean, it wasn't an easy death, but I don't know, the tone of the movie breaks it for me.
I do like the way he kills the other son, though, with the bomb and the isometric, and that's Punisher. That is so classic Punisher. And the whole convoluted murder thing with the friends, that's not the Punisher, at least from what I've ever read. He wouldn't bother doing that shit.
No. He
might make him fucking watch while he, cut her throat, but he wouldn't come up with some okay, so that's the woman that, ordered your family dead. Yeah. Oh, her husband got to kill her. Good revenge.
And again, it also implies that he somehow knew that, too, which I'm not sure how he could have known. I think he would have just assumed that John Travolta did them anyway.
And I did want to make sure I mentioned the fact that, as soon as they showed the medicine man in his canoe, that you just knew that was going to be who was going to be putting him back together and nursing him back to health. Because you can't have a character like that in a movie and not have it go that way.
Absolutely. It's like the mentor character in Spawn. He's just such a derivative character that we didn't even bother mentioning him. But
I forgot about him.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to get out before we move on?
Just watch Netflix.
Watch the Netflix version of Daredevil if you want to see the Punisher.
who
No foolish heroics, if you please.
is Dark Man. They destroyed everything he had, all that he loved, everything that he was. Now, crime has a new enemy, and justice has a brand new face.
I was afraid that you wouldn't want me anymore.
Of course I still want you.
The good news is that I know who's behind our little troubles of late. Finish it.
He has the power to look like any man,
These two are both sons of witches!
but he is unlike any man.
So, here we go. We're going to talk about Darkman. It's directed by Sam Raimi, which I've gone on record in the past as saying is a director that I like. And he would, after this, go on to making the Spider-Man movies. And I think that he wanted to do Spider-Man for a long time. He said that he had like a drawing of Spider-Man on the wall of his bedroom when he was a kid. Like, he loved Spider-Man. And some of the action sequences towards the end of Darkman, with Darkman swinging around, being towed by a helicopter and flying through the air,
yeah.
you could really sort of see him almost auditioning for Spider-Man. But
He really wanted to do the Spirit too. That was his, or Spirit, and he wanted to do a Batman movie. That's why he created Darkman. Those are kind of his
personal favorites.
Yeah.
Well, and as usual with Sam Raimi, he wanted, Bruce Campbell to star. And as usual, the studio said no for some fucking reason. So he ended up getting Liam Neeson, a sort of young, spry Liam Neeson. What this movie has going for it, it's an original property, so nerds like you and I can't say, why didn't they do this? How come the costume's not right? Blah, 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 blah. And
I love it.
The other thing is that we have a true auteur behind the camera. So he's telling his story in exactly the way he wants to tell it, just as crazy as he wants to tell it, and just as violent as he wants to tell it. And let's not be, beat around the bush. This has got like pornographic levels of violence to it. It is unbefucking-leavably violent and crazy and over the top. But it knows that it's unbelievably violent and crazy and over the top. And if you're willing to go with that vibe, which I realize a lot of people aren't, I think you'll have a lot of fun with Darkman. But I do think it's one of those experiences that you will either love or loathe. I put myself in the love category, but I hold no resentment towards those who are on the other side. Where do you land, brother?
It's funny. I saw this movie. I'm pretty sure I went to it in the theater. I don't remember much, but I remember it just blowing me away because I'd never seen a superhero movie that was like violent like this was. Like it's almost half a horror movie.
Oh yeah.
And
absolutely.
like there are some profoundly like insane stuff, like the scene where he's getting tortured and beaten up, and ultimately everyone thinks he's dead from the in the bath, and
a bunch of goons show up to the scientist's lab. They burn his hands brutally. They dip his face in acid. They blow up the entire lab. They kill his assistant. And in the explosion, his body is somehow thrown from the building, lands in the river, and miraculously he survives. But because of the crazy extent of his injuries, when he's recovered, nobody knows who he is. He's nursed back to health, and his powers, I guess you would call them, is he does not feel pain. All of the nerve
because he had
endings
the
in his
third-degree
body,
burns. They severed all his nerves so that he wouldn't be screaming in agony
all of the time. So he feels no pain, and he's a scientist who has got this formula where he can make very convincing sort of fleshy masks, but they only last for a limited amount of time. So most of the time he's this terrible charred monster, but he can wear these skin masks to make himself look like pretty much whoever he wants to, and covertly sneak into places. So he can be anybody.
And the dark,
sorry?
And the dark part comes in that the skin falls apart in the light.
That's breaks apart under sunlight. But so he can be basically whoever he wants, and he doesn't feel pain. The trade-off for that is that he has lost his mind.
Yeah.
He is crazy.
Yeah. The cutoff from the sensory inputs makes him he loops, right? So if he gets angry, he just gets angrier and angrier and angrier until he is completely enraged, but it also gives him adrenaline and, again, right? Like that whole thing. So it's, yeah, I like this movie. I think that there's a few, I think part of the reason why it works is it doesn't make some of the same stupid mistakes that a bunch of these other movies we've been talking about make.
Right.
And one of the biggest pluses to it, I think that, especially for kind of how it is, like it's a little goofy, but it's not.
Oh, it's a lot goofy.
It's very brutal. Yeah, no, but Danny Elfman does the score, right?
No, yes.
It's a case study in how music can, like how your score can make your movie work, because there's so many of those scenes that are just, and I mean I love Danny Elfman stuff, but it works. The music behind it makes you go along with it in a way that you necessarily wouldn't otherwise.
The scale is huge. Like, this is definitely one of those Sam Raimi movies that grabs you by the face and pulls you through the experience of this movie. They're constantly hitting you with crazy camera angles and really surprising scenes, either with violence or character choices that you're not going to see coming. And it's this sort of cartoon feel to it that makes it feel comic book. Like I said, This isn't based on a comic book. This is Sam Raimi making a comic book movie a la Sam Raimi. So he's got some of that crazy Evil Dead energy, but he's making it into a comic book movie. Really interesting thing about Darkman, and we're going to get into some fan theories and conspiracies here, but it's one that I am on board with. Sam Raimi was in tight with these two guys called Joel and Ethan Coen. And he's super good friends with Frances McDormand, who was at that time, I believe, engaged to Joel Coen. And she's in the movie. And Joel Coen's first editing job was helping out doing some edits on Evil Dead. And the Coens and Sam Raimi had previously worked together in a give and take sort of way on this movie called Crime Wave, which Raimi directed. Subsequent to this movie, they worked together. Raimi shot second unit and co-wrote the screenplay to their movie Hudsucker Proxy.
I love that movie.
The theory is that the Coen brothers did a ghostwrite on the draft of Darkman. And I encourage you to listen to some of the dialogue of the henchmen and the villains, specifically Larry Drake and his collection of fingers and a cigarette stubbing thing or his stogie knife. There's a few exchanges in this movie that feel very Coen-esque. It's still Raimi's world. It's crazy and it's over the top, and it's not something you'd see in typical Coens. But I believe it. I don't know it to be fact, but watching this movie and knowing the relationship, how close they all were, and that Frances McDormand was in the movie, and that they worked basically on 3 projects in a row together, I think there's some Coen brothers fingerprints on Darkman. Now, that maybe make me like it a little bit more, but it certainly doesn't make me say that I'm going to elevate it to the level of a Coen brothers joint. But it's just one of the things that's really interesting about the movie that's part of the reason I'm fascinated by it.
I actually, and it's funny because Frances McDormand is like just so not used to her capacity in it. It's a rescue me role. It's a rescue me role. Yeah, it's really poor. I honestly, and for all that it mattered in the movie, she could have just died, and it could have been part of his revenge. Like the only thing that she kind of did was that, that symbolic you can't go back thing, right? Where he tries to be himself to be with her, and it doesn't work, and it just further drives him insane. And that's one of the things I do love is the those weird special effects zoom in flashing light color, like to show him going crazy and in rage.
Right.
I love that kind of stuff, right? Like it reminds me of how they used to do it in the old days, and like that. I think that works so much better than some of the other things that you see in some of the other movies that we're going to still talk about.
It's
whatever.
Full of old school blue screen effects and crossfades, and in a way that I don't think it was done self-consciously at the time. I think he was doing it as cheaply and efficiently as he can, and Sam Raimi knows every trick in the book, so he's going to fucking use them. But you're right. I think that's part of the things that makes it perpetually watchable to this day. You remember one of the henchmen? His name is Rick. He's got these glasses, but he is shoved out of a sewer hole and smashed by a car. That's Sam Raimi's brother. Fun fact, everybody. I wanted to talk about Larry Drake. Actually, we just talked about him previously in the episode previous to this, weirdly. He was a bad guy in the movie The Beast, this Peter Benchley squid movie. Anyway, he's an interesting figure. He was more of a TV guy for a long time here, and up until this point, he was probably known to most people as the guy who was the handicap dude on, I want to say, L.A. Law, or maybe St. Elsewhere or L.A.'s Law, one of those popular late 80s, early 90s shows. And because of this movie, he ended up, being cast as mad scientists and Dr. Giggles, because... Say what you will, Durant's character is way over the top, like way over the top, but Larry Drake does bring the evil, and he does seem to understand, more so than some of the other actors, what kind of movie he's in. I like Liam Neeson a lot, but part of me is heartbroken that we only get that brief glimpse of Bruce Campbell as the Dark Man, because I think Bruce Campbell would have latched onto the crazy in a more entertaining way than Liam Neeson did. Again, all due respect to Liam Neeson, but especially at this time in his career, he wasn't the badass superhero guy, right? He was the Oscar bait sort of hunky dreamboat dude. I don't think
he even.
What's that?
What other movies did he do around this? Wasn't this one of his? This seems like it should have been one of his first. That wasn't like a country gentleman.
It's certainly one of his first starring roles, but it's certainly one of his first big starring roles. But Neeson's been around forever. You bump into him in like crazy movies, like The Bounty with Anthony Hopkins, and was he in Excalibur? Like, I don't know. You see him in he's been around forever. Whenever they need a mentor type figure, usually he'll get a phone call. Right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to sound like I'm talking shit about Liam Neeson. I do think that he's a good actor, but I think that whenever you decide not to listen to Sam Raimi, it just seems to be a mistake, right? I picture, Bruce Campbell, who proves to be a genius for his portrayal of Ash again and again. How interesting and different the movie might have been, I don't want to review the movie that might have been against the movie that is. I still think the movie that is fine, but there's so much interesting stuff about this movie and around this movie that I can't not like it. But I said at the beginning of the review, I also understand somebody watching this, even if it's just your wrong mood or the wrong day, it would just hit you wrong and it would be unwatchable. What is this nonsense?
It's funny though. Like I agree with what you're saying there too. Darkman was the last movie of the 6 that I watched, and I don't know if I did it on purpose, but there's this part of me that, because I remember, it's one of those movies that I remember watching.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, wow, that was a crazy movie. I really liked that. And I was really worried because so many of these other movies that I watched,
they got worse.
I was like, oh, yeah, I don't remember Blade being a great movie, but boy, I don't remember it being quite that bad, And so I was like, is this gonna break my like little Darkman crush that I've always had all these years? And it didn't. I was pleasantly surprised. I found new things in it, which I wasn't expecting to find.
In a way, this movie is guilty of a lot of stuff that we bitched about in the other movies. Is that it's not all the special effects have aged. It's dealing in a lot of cliches. But I think that Sam Raimi knows what he's doing. He knows he's dealing in crazy archetypes. He
Mhm.
knows that Frances McDormand is a rescue me character. He knows, that the big bad guy is playing it way over the top, and that of course the final climactic fight will take place in the skeleton of a building that's being built, a high rise, so that they can have this balancing fight thousands of feet above the ground. Like, there's a lot of comic booky stuff to it, but it's done deliberately and joyfully, so they don't feel like cliches. They just sort of feel like a celebration of the form. The only thing that sort of colors it with a different crazy spin is, like I said, the level of crazy violence to it. So that's what I would say. If you like superhero movies, you might like this. If you like crazy over the top violence, you'll probably definitely get behind Darkman.
Yeah, and if you're a Sam Raimi fan, you've probably already seen it.
Absolutely.
Story goes that he'll be normal during the day, but at night, in the presence of evil, the rider takes over.
There's a TV show that I really enjoyed a lot called Community that Dan Harmon created, and huge fan. In the third or fourth season, our main character Abed is taking a class into which they get in a conversation about Nicolas Cage. Is he brilliant or is he awful? Is he a genius or is he insane?
I love that episode.
And the debate almost drives Abed crazy. Ghost Rider is clearly evidence to the fact that Nicolas Cage is crazy. Like, I believe he referred to this as his sort of Uber acting. He wanted to try out some sort of crazy, edgy stuff, and I think that the idea of playing someone possessed by demons would give him some more freedom to kind of go super out there in that crazy Nicolas Cage type of way. But this property, this Ghost Rider comic book character, is like awesomeness on a page. I remember seeing covers of the old Ghost Rider comic book when I was a kid and just thinking, that shit's awesome. Every cover looked like it would be ink on some badass biker's arm. You know, you got the skull, you got the flames, you got the chains, you got the motorbike with the burning fucking tires, like...
More at home in heavy metal
yeah.
than in the pages of a Marvel mag, for sure.
And the image there is very strong, and it's a demonic figure, but he's still punishing the wicked by showing them their sins and, collecting souls for the devil. And
no, that friggin' motorbike with flaming wheels. Oh man, like and the skull face, the fire. It's
fucking cool.
It's classic.
It's fucking cool. Let's be real. It's fucking cool. But it works way better in the pages of a comic book than it does in a movie. My God, like I'm struggling because I'm not sure quite where to begin. But
you know the part when it stops being like the young version of him and it's like the old version of Nick Cage, and you're like, hey, this looks like this how I can get behind this movie, and then like Nick Cage shows up, and you're like,
Well, here's the thing. I think part of it might be that outside of the cool-looking Ghost Rider figure, there's a lot about the character that's dated. It came out in the late 70s when Evel Knievel was super cool, right? Yeah. So Johnny Blaze is like emulating the Evel Knievel thing. He's a stunt driver, and that's really cool, whereas people are less impressed by people who jump over buses these days. But we have to pretend it's the late 70s and people still give a shit about that sort of thing. And he's a stunt performer, and his daddy is dying, and he makes a deal with the devil, and surprise, surprise, the devil fucks him over. I mean, the Faustian deal in movies is something that happens again and again. You could sit here and say, just don't make a deal with the devil. It's never going to work out. But I don't believe in fighting the plot. This is the movie that we are presented with. Let's roll with those punches.
Well, and at least it's true to the origin story. I think... I don't think it was for his father, but other than that, it's
Pretty close.
Pretty close. I don't.
But the problem is, to me, is that the tormented soul, this Johnny Blaze character, is kind of an asshole. Like, when he's not the demon that is like, pure fury and rage, this fallen angel thing, he's kind of just default a dick. His dad died. He made a deal with the devil, and he was going to be possessed. But he could have had a conversation with his girlfriend instead of just driving up to where she was waiting for him, giving her the stink eye, and then driving away. He constantly is, punishing the people around him for helping him. And when he wolfs out into Ghost Rider, Nicolas Cage disappears. He becomes a special effect, albeit a cool one. But
not even that good, honestly.
This is a long 123 minutes. I will say they made a sequel to this movie called Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, and that is not a good movie. It's not a good movie, but it is so much better than this movie, both in the way it tells stories and in the efficiency of the storytelling and in telling a clear plot that makes sense. And just... it's sloppy. It's sloppy. Our big bad in this movie is played by Wes Bentley, who was recognized for American Beauty in 1999, and then just disappeared for a long time. And he's slowly starting to crawl his way back now, but he just looks like this sort of weak, pretty boy. Not much of a real struggle for this demonic thing to take off. It wouldn't seem. All of his power is sort of packed into this sort of rich kid seniority, and that he's got a fate, he's got all this power that's behind him. But once again, like I was talking about with Punisher, John Travolta was never scary. Even when Wes Bentley's face would wolf out for no reason. There's this one scene where they show him walking in the desert, and he just makes this grar face for us, apparently, just so we make sure that we know he's evil. Like, I'm never scared for him. I'm never worried for him. I don't really care or want to understand his plot, He kills a bunch of people by touching them, and he recruits a bunch of evil demons, and he's largely ineffectual as a villain. So it's a good thing that we have Academy Award winner Nicolas Cage to center this movie and give us stuff worth watching and talking about, right? Right?
No. It's funny. You need a good villain to tell a good story, and there's nothing good. There's just I hate this movie so much. There's these 3 elemental lieutenants that he has, and they're like if you took dirt and you put an evil demon in it, it'd be like demon dirt.
Right.
And so he has, they're like the mini bosses that he has to fight before he can finally get to Blackheart or whatever the hell the guy's name is.
Blackheart. What a terrible name. Well,
but a legit Marvel character. Okay. He is actually Mephisto, played by
Peter Fonda.
Peter Fonda. Thank you. That character in the Marvel universe does have a son. That son is Blackheart, and Blackheart does that. Those are canon villains from Ghost Rider.
They weren't just making shit up out of nothing.
No. I mean, they don't look like that. They don't take on human form. They're like these crazy, monstrous things and whatever. They actually, at one point, when Blackheart's walking in the desert, his shadow looks like the way the character's drawn in the comic books.
See, I missed that.
It's this weird head thing and whatever. Anyway,
That's good to hear, though, that there was at least some fan service happening.
Well,
yes and no.
The fans are waiting very impatiently for every time that the Ghost Rider comes out, because that's all they're there to see. And I mean, so there's Elemental Earth guy who uses all his Elemental Earth powers to ram a truck into Ghost Rider.
Yep. And it doesn't seem to hurt him at all. He's one of these bad guy or good guy bad guys. He can take all the punishment in the world and it won't be a problem until the script needs him to be wounded for a moment, and then all of a sudden he'll have to shake something off.
Yeah. It's he'd make a great pro wrestler. But yeah, and then he just kills him with a chain, and you're just like, that was that was supposed to be a fight. Like,
yeah.
he hit him with a truck, and this guy had earth powers, and he hit him with a truck. Like, what the hell are you doing? And then, and then he fights Air Guy, and his chain goes through the Air Guy, and he has to uses it to create like a flaming cyclone to burn him to death inside it. And like, but these fight scenes, these like, and they've been building this up. They built up these guys, and these fight scenes are like, they're under 2 minutes. Yep. I swear to God, there's nothing to them. It's like he tries to do this, the guy laughs at him, and he tries to do the other thing, and he kills him.
Yeah.
And that's the scene, and you're just like, but I wanted, and I don't know if it was just a limitation of the CGI, or they just didn't want to do it, or they just spent too much money buying Nicolas Cage, bunny rabbits to drink their blood, or whatever the fuck he does to get himself in character. But like, it was just, and then, I was saying, like, I used to really hate this one part of the movie where, Ghost Rider has gotten there's a scroll with all these, or a contract with all these damned souls that is this massive power, and that's the MacGuffin in the movie. And it's being held by Sam Elliott, who's the last Ghost Rider.
I was going to get into that and how stupid that was, but yes. Go
on. God, I fucking hate that scene too. All of it. I hate all of it. But anyway, so yeah, and I used to really hate this part because Ghost Rider's coming to give this. He's trying to give this scroll to Blackheart, right? Like, the villain is going to get the MacGuffin in exchange for the girl, of course.
He's going to rescue the girl.
Who saw that coming, everyone? And the water guy, the last of the three elemental guys, attacks him in a swamp because obviously, he's got to ride his motorbike through a swamp and be really. That was the other thing. He has to be really sneaky about it for no reason whatsoever.
The movie needed another action sequence, so they gave us one.
Right. Yeah. So, and he gets attacked, and then the thing pulls him into the water, and he's going to drown, and then he gets angry, and he burns him alive in the water, and it's just like, it means nothing. It's just, but I hated that scene because I couldn't figure it out, because I was like, what the hell is he doing? Why is he attacking him when he's trying to get to his boss? And I actually caught something in the rewatch. I was telling you about this before. When I rewatched it, there's actually a scene where Blackheart says, no, I need him slowed down for a bit because he's weaker in the daylight. So he's like sacrificed his pawn for it. And I actually kind of like that. That turned that around on me.
Congratulations for finding something to like here.
Silver lining.
Yes.
I don't hate it as much as I used to hate it.
Two things that I usually have no problem with, but I have a problem with here. Sam Elliott. Love the man. He's the stranger in The Big Lebowski, and he's just got that deep voice that you can't help but love. He gives us a little bit of narration to help us give some of the backstory of the devil and whatnot, and the sort of origins of the Ghost Rider legend at the beginning of the movie. And then he shows up when Nicolas Cage wakes up in a graveyard. And he, as you mentioned, is the guy who's holding this ancient contract, which is supposed to be so important to the plot. And then at the very end, when Nicolas Cage is going to head out to the big bad fight, he turns into the original Ghost Rider on horseback, and the two of them ride to the location of where the battle will take place. And then Sam Elliott says, "This is where I leave you." Like, he could only change one more time, so he wanted to ride with Ghost Rider, but not help Ghost Rider.
I know.
What was the point? Thing. What was the point? Like, this movie is 123 minutes long. You could have taken that whole business with him out of it. Leave the narration because we like his voice. Nothing would have been lost from the movie. He finds the scroll somewhere else. The other thing is Eva Mendes, who I think is a decent actress on top of being beautiful, who has nothing to do here. Nothing to do here. Johnny Blaze treats her like shit when she's a little kid, and then 20 years later, she's still obsessed with him. He treats her like shit again.
I think my favorite part is when she's trying to do her job, and he parks the motorcycle in front of her and sexually harasses her until she decides to go out with him.
Will not take no for an answer. And then eventually, of course, she needs to be rescued. There's no chemistry between her and Nicolas Cage. None. And there's no reason for her to like Johnny Blaze. So when it comes to him sacrificing everything to save her, I don't buy it. The big win for the movie when they finally get the big bad Blackheart. He tries to use his stare. The Ghost Rider can stare at you and force you to live all of the sins that you've committed, or feel all the pain from the sins.
The penance stare.
And his penance stare doesn't work, as he says to the Ghost Rider, "Your penance stare is no good on me." Until the ritual...
I don't have a soul.
Exactly. Until the ritual where he consumes like the 1,000 darkest souls that all come into his body at once. Which actually, now that I think of it, almost exactly the same thing happens to the Stephen Dorff character in Blade. But anyway,
yeah,
he gets all these souls in him, and then, a party on. Now not only can the Ghost Rider use that, but that's going to be the big thing that kills him. The villain is not necessarily defeated by Ghost Rider. He's defeated because he didn't think through his plan that clearly.
Yeah.
So what you're left with is a crazy, over-the-top, and not good performance by Nicolas Cage. I've made apologies for Nicolas Cage in the past. I've defended movies like Knowing, but I will not defend Ghost Rider. Interestingly, it's the one movie out of this list of movies that we're watching that I believe wasn't rated R, and is one of the few movies of these list of movies that might have benefited from being rated R. Donald Logue shows up again. He has bad luck when it comes to superhero movies as Johnny Blaze's best friend who just spouts exposition and then fades into the background.
Pointless characters. It was a slog.
And that's where I leave it. Like, it was a slog. I do not wish this movie upon anyone. Like, so many of these movies we're watching is making me feel better about Blade, which is making me question my life.
Well, and it's all of the awful expositive plot that is used to tie together the CGI scenes, and then the CGI scenes really aren't that good.
Nope.
Like, a lot of them are just him with flame effects stomping around, swinging a chain, or pyro. Like, he explodes a bunch of cop cars in the one thing, or and he gets angry. Oh, and of course there's the classic, like, oh, let's have every cop shoot him.
Yeah. We had that scene in Spawn, right? Again, it's just like a bunch of scenes from different movies, like cut, copy, paste. The problem is that Ghost Rider was such a cool image, and it shouldn't have been so hard to make it watchable. But this is your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, saying it is not watchable.
Yeah, it's trash.
Jonah Hex.
You don't look so tough.
Hey, Hex, what happened to your face?
Cut myself shaving. What happened to yours?
Always do like when you finally show up.
Jeez, woman, how many men you see in a day?
Quentin Turnbull is...
Don't you dare say that name to me.
Quentin Turnbull surfaced about a month ago.
We want Turnbull dead. Why didn't you just say that to begin with? Anything new, Smith?
Thought you'd never ask. I take it that means you approve.
This is the future.
Future's bright. Can you shoot?
Can you?
This war begins right here!
I own you now!
That ain't much for being owned.
Turnbull! We ain't near settled our score.
So we're going to talk about Jonah Hex. It's directed by a man named Jimmy Hayward. He is known for directing Horton Hears a Who and another animated feature called Freebirds. I assume it's because he was proficient in special effects is why he was selected to direct Jonah Hex, although it doesn't have a whole shit ton of CGI rendering in it. It certainly has its fair share. But it's strange when you think of like those are the three movies he's made, okay? Horton Hears a Who, Freebirds, Jonah Hex. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things is not the same. But what makes Jonah Hex especially guilty in a way that some of the other movies that we have been talking about are not as guilty is that Jonah Hex came out in 2010. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was sort of a thing, you know. It was the properties were popping. What a good comic book movie was, and how to build a comic book world was, being presented to us very well, very efficiently by Marvel. So when you hear about Jonah Hex coming out, and you hear like this crazy cast that is involved, Josh Brolin, John Malkovich, Michael Fassbender, like it's strange. Like all of these really talented people are in this really, really not good movie. It's written by this team, Neveldine and Taylor, who wrote the Crank movies and the second Ghost Rider movie. And typically what I say about them is I don't think they're amazing screenwriters, but they're good at momentum. They can keep a movie moving, with the notable exception of Jonah Hex, which seems to, even though it's largely on horseback, to be spinning its wheels. The other fun fact that I want to get to before I try to describe the plot is Michael Shannon was in this movie, and he was cut out of it. Almost entirely. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Negan from The Walking Dead, was in this movie and was almost entirely cut out of it. I'm starting to wonder how much of this movie ended up on the cutting room floor. Because at 81 minutes, it seems like it's about an hour of setup to 20 minutes of action, and not a lot to recommend in the in-between. All of this in spite the fact that Jonah Hex is one of the coolest, most badass characters out there. So I'm disappointed with Jonah Hex, but I'm here to hear what Brock has to say.
So I had a few things to say about Ghost Rider that, because I really hate that movie. I had never seen Jonah Hex leading up into this, and I that's on purpose. I love Jonah Hex. He's one of my favorite characters. I love that genre of like alt western where it's a little, little steampunky, but not quite, but really dark and gritty. Maybe there's a little bit of supernaturally to it.
Yeah, it's a horror western. That's what I say.
Right?
It's like a Western Constantine, in the way he has all these supernatural powers. He's half dead. He can communicate with the dead. All of that.
That's all bullshit.
That's all bullshit?
That's all bullshit. The half-dead thing is all bullshit and completely made up for no reason at all. Part one of why I hate this movie so much. And it's like, I hate this movie like I would probably hate a crazy person that murdered somebody I loved.
Ouch.
Like, I'd be like, I can't even understand the insanity behind them, but I'm just so mad that they did it, because this movie is awful. Like, there's just it goes nowhere. It leaps around. There's this choice to have a metaphysical battle play out in some spirit world between Brolin's character, between Jonah Hex and Malkovich's character, who I don't even remember his name, and it screams it over and over again throughout the movie.
Turnbull is the
Turnbull, right? And anytime Hex is losing or dying or hurt in the movie, they cut to him losing to Turnbull in this metaphysical spirit world fight. No matter who he's fighting, like if he's fighting one of his underlings and he gets shot with a shotgun and he's near death, and it's like it's almost the end of the fight, in this spirit world,
right?
Which, I can understand picking something like that and going with it to kind of, but they just keep going back to it, and they keep going back to it and back to it and back to it to the point where at the end he's fighting Turnbull in the real world, and they keep flashing to him fighting him in the spirit world, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, this is just, it just makes this nothing to this. Oh god. And like, he gets shot with a shotgun and he ends up
Okay.
and here come the Native Americans to patch him up. And it's just like, oh,
we're getting ahead of ourselves.
No.
We need to set the table before we start moaning, because I don't think we're making any sense yet.
I know, I'm sorry.
Josh Brolin plays Jonah Hex. He was working for Quentin Turnbull, but decided that the guy had gone off the reservation is a little bit too crazy. But in exchange for betraying Turnbull, Malkovich kills his wife and his kid in front of him and disfigures his face and leaves him for dead, or leaves him scarred and ruined. So to me, this whole metaphysical thing, this no matter who he's fighting, no matter what he's wrestling with, it's all Turnbull. It's all in his mind about Turnbull. That again, that's my trying to defend this really hard to defend movie. I guess the only cautiously pleasant thing I can say about Jonah Hex movie is that at 81 minutes, I didn't feel the length as much as I did in some of the other movies that we watched. Like Ghost Rider at 123 minutes, like it was a chore. There's something about how this went so catastrophically wrong that is weirdly fascinating. One of the most popular and interesting actors that we have going right now is Michael Fassbender. Michael Fassbender plays one of the big bads. He plays this guy Burke, who there's a huge fight scene that happens to it. And it's one of the classic, like, when bad movies happen to good actors. Because you can see Fassbender trying to find a way to make that character better and more interesting than he is. And unfortunately, he's not having that much success. I think the person who comes closest to success is John Malkovich, but maybe only because he's had practice from doing shit movies like Con Air and shit like that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Where once you've played Cyrus the Virus, the idea of playing someone who is just so clearly just the personification of bad is something he can do in his sleep. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe it was like, who can we get to be Turnbull? What's the most obvious person? John Malkovich. Who do we get to be Jonah Hex? Well, who's hot right now? Josh Brolin. Who's a super hot love interest that we can plug into this movie? Ooh, Megan Fox. We need some comic relief. What do we got? Will Arnett's popular these days. It was almost as if this movie was spat out by a fucking computer, right? If we put enough talented people in this movie, it won't matter that even though we have 7 screenwriters and no script, somehow this movie will magically come together. And luckily, this big budget special effects historical extravaganza is being helmed by somebody who's never worked with actors before. Like, I don't know how it looked good on paper. I know that even Josh Brolin has publicly said, bad things about the movie. It started off with a bunch of cool ideas and us believing we could make a really badass movie. And somewhere along the way, it went south. So look at Jonah Hex as a cautionary tale. One that's easier to stomach than some of the longer ones here, like I said, like Ghost Rider. I would not say watch Jonah Hex to learn anything about Jonah Hex or comic books or how to make a cool comic book movie. Watch Jonah Hex to learn what not to do when adapting a comic book. Watch Jonah Hex to know what happens when you cast types for the parts instead of the right actor for the job. I could get in more to the plot about Turnbull making this unlikely, huge, high-tech machine, second only to Kenneth Branagh driving the mechanical spider in Wild Wild West, this device that he has created that can obliterate an entire town like it's a nuclear arsenal in 1880 whatever, where this is supposed to be set, is, even by comic book standards, pretty silly. So,
but that is that's at least somewhat, like, Jonah Hex ends up against things like that.
Right.
Like,
and that's the cyberpunk sort of angle you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, but the problem with this is it just feels like it's trying to be Wild Wild West, but without any way to get there.
Yeah. It's not funny, it's not scary, and it's not exciting. So...
They say, like, never never follow a better comic, right? Like Wild Wild West is not even a good movie.
No,
so
it is not.
Why would you try and latch on to what it had so disastrously failed to do with better, money and time and effort behind it?
But when I talk about like Punisher, where it would jump crazily from extremes in tone so that the whole movie didn't make sense, this movie felt strangely toneless.
Yeah, it just plods along.
Which is bizarre because there's so much cool stuff in it. I like the idea of him being able to question a dead man. I like the ideas in the movie. It reminds me, this is a much better movie, but another comic book movie called Constantine, where it's not an amazing movie, but you can see all of these cool ideas in it, and there's enough, cool stuff in the movie to make it worth your time. Whereas
I should hate Constantine a lot more than I actually do. I really don't mind it that much, but anyway.
Well, it has its problems, but it's a conversation for another day. But
yeah.
It say what you will, it picked a tone and went with it. Whereas this one doesn't have a tone. Like I said, it just lays out there. It plays before you. It doesn't affect you emotionally. It doesn't affect you. You don't get engaged by the story. You don't get, most surprisingly, engaged by the performances. Because like I say, everybody in this is good, with maybe the exception of Megan Fox. I don't know if she's good or bad. She's just fucking hot.
but it's almost completely unmemorable as well. Right? How does he win at the end?
Turnbull gets caught up in the gears of the machine, and the machine explodes with him on it, as I recall.
Yeah. But like, I have to think about it. I can't go, oh, and that scene where it's like, oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, the coolest part
of the boat.
Yeah, the coolest part of Jonah Hex was blank. I don't know.
You know what I did like about it?
What's that?
Fuck all.
How about we stop there then? It's time. I know that this list is almost, judging shades of brown on shit, but I'm curious to hear, how did these rank? What was your least favorite of these scary comics, and why?
Our number 6, Jonah Hex, the insane person that killed my family member. There's just nothing to this movie. I mean, the CGI's bad, the action's bad. It had budget, it had actors, it had everything it needed to be passable. Like, it didn't have to be a brilliant movie, but it's just, there's nothing. It's not even over the top. It doesn't make any strong choices. It's lazy, it's sloppy, and it has, even some of the other movies on here, you can be like, well, it was a product of its times. Well, this is the heyday, right? This was like one of DC's first attempts, and I mean, not that they've done great with all their attempts, but this one was a real setback.
They needed to try a little harder.
Yeah, there's nothing there. I mean, yeah, and then so number 5 is Ghost Rider. You can only make cool things so much in your movie without, anything else, and that's all that there is. There's some cool scenes with Ghost Rider that, like where he's riding his motorcycle down the front of the building. That's at least a scene I was like, that's a cool scene. And there's none of that in Jonah Hex, which is why it got slotted just above it. I love Nicolas Cage in a couple of movies, but in general, I find him he's just an anchor. He's terrible, and he's terrible in this movie, and there's just nothing else to it. Like, it's not even a good movie. There's nothing good on any of the levels. But next up is Spawn. I mean, oh my God, this movie is just overambitious, and I can put it above the other two for trying hard and failing. But it also tried hard and failed for reasons that it shouldn't have failed, right? Like, you can say, oh, well, CGI is really expensive and it's hard to do, or, oh, like this is that. But like, you can cast better than that. You can get better performances out of the actors that are there. It had good actors giving bad performances. And while I'll forgive CGI of the time, and, for whatever other things that were going on, like we discussed with, potentially time crunches or, special effects guys that were, pretty too new to be taking on a movie of this magnitude. That only holds so much water before you're like, yeah, but this is still a really hard movie to watch because it's really not that good. Number 3 is Punisher. The only reason that it got number 3 instead of Blade, because I put these two really close together as well. Blade's my number 2. Is that Blade at least maintained its theme, whereas Punisher did that awful yo-yo in the middle where I just didn't know where I was going. Plus, the needless rewrite of the beginning, the ludicrous, Nancy Drew stuff going on. Yeah. It drops it below. Blade is at least internally consistent. It's not high cinema, but it is what it is, and it's a Wesley Snipes action movie that's themed after a Marvel comic, and I can live with that.
Yeah,
it's not something I would ever watch probably again by choice, but it is what it is. And my number 1 movie is Darkman. I think it is the actual only successful movie of this bunch. It's successful in tone. We talked about it at fairly good length. I don't think we need to necessarily go over that again. Flaws aside, it's of any of these that I'd watched before, it was the only one I was happy to watch again, and I was afraid I wouldn't. And I was happily surprised that it actually still held up. And I think that's a testament to, it's also, when you really think about it, it's the only one of these movies that had a proper director helming it. And that, when you have to be the right kind of director to do these kinds of movies.
Yeah, he was still pretty young. I guess he made Evil Dead in 1982, so he'd been making movies for 8 years. But I think that this was a next-level project for Raimi at the very least. Like I said, he made Darkman to prove that he could, handle a budget type of movie, And you feel the love in Darkman in a way like the person that you hire to direct Ghost Rider should fucking love Ghost Rider and be thrilled that he got the gig,
Yeah.
It shouldn't just be like, well, this will be a good excuse for me to show off my special effects work. I usually try to treat even a mediocre movie with kid gloves. But there's something about when you have millions of dollars at your disposal, when you have this level of talent to put into your cast and your special effects, that it should, a lot of these movies, just by the property itself, should be watchable just because of that fucking image of Ghost Rider, like we said. Like, the bare simplicity of, the Punisher being Death Wish the superhero,
Yeah.
It should work. It should, like these are basic comic book stories,
Yeah.
They ain't deep. So you'd think that they wouldn't be hard to translate, but here's my list. Unfortunately, we are not going 6 for 6 or 0 for 6. But this was a race for the last place. It was tough. Hopefully you're not too mad. I did not put Jonah Hex on the bottom. Believe it or not, I put Spawn dead last. I think that the potential for that to be something that was really exciting and cool and different, the fact that the hero was brand new from Todd McFarlane, who was the hottest name in comics, that it dealt with hell, that it had an evil clown in it, that it had all the stuff that should have worked and been cool, and that it failed so utterly and completely. The special effects were embarrassing. It's the only time I can think of where I'm actually watching Martin Sheen actively suck in a movie. And this man has been in terrible movies, but always been able to somehow pull out at least a decent performance and retain some small measure of dignity. I'm sure he was probably felt so lucky when he got the gig on The West Wing after Spawn came out, because that might have been the thing that had killed his career. In 5th place, I put Ghost Rider. And Ghost Rider was the closest to beating Spawn to the bottom, but there were a few accidentally cool sequences in Ghost Rider, and the effects weren't terrible in Ghost Rider, so I gave it 5th place. But again, shades of brown on shit. I'm not recommending either of those. All the way in 4th position, Brock, is where I put Jonah Hex. It's one of these movies that I refer to as being a fascinating catastrophe. Because it is, it's a catastrophe. Nothing works. Nothing works. And that in itself is weird and interesting. It's almost accidentally interesting to watch, just to see, how could this not have at least been okay somehow accidentally? Like, in third place is the tonally all over the place The Punisher. I think something that I neglected to say when we were doing the review is that as incompetent as the screenplay is and the tone shifts are, it's actually a pretty well-made movie, technically. The action in it is decently handled. There's craft to it. But this is not my Punisher, and like I said, you can either be dark as shit, heavy revenge movie, or you can be a fish out of water buddy comedy. You can't be both. Not even if you're Deadpool.
If they'd cut that whole apartment weirdness and just had it be like him doing a longer extended vendetta against them, it'd have been. I mean, I'd have forgiven a lot more of the weird story things that they decided to do.
Yeah.
As long as I felt like it was still telling a consistent story, I think it would have been a way better movie.
Yeah. I have to say, Brock, I am uncomfortable, almost edging on hating myself for putting Blade all the way in second place. Because I'm not a huge fan of Blade, to be honest. But for a style as substance movie, or something you can watch with the sound off and say, "Ooh, look at the pretty colors," for the kind of amusing self-love that is so obvious in Wesley Snipes' portrayal, like, he loves playing Blade, he loves how cool Blade is, and on some level, I think, believes, at least when they were making the movie, that he was Blade. So, say what you will, he committed to the part.
But it doesn't try to be anything that it isn't.
I agree with what you're saying, but I would still say that Blade, I think, thinks it's a little bit smarter than it is.
Yeah.
But the special effects work, and Wesley Snipes looks the part. It's the closest. It's closer to successful than the rest of them. But like, I already reviewed Blade 2 in the podcast, and it's directed by Guillermo del Toro, who's a guy I fucking love. And
I know.
And it's like I said then, and I will reiterate it now. I am not a fan of the Blade franchise, and yet somehow Blade made it all the way to second place. I think the books were cooked with this Darkman being in the list. I mean, some people might argue, is that fair that it's considered a comic book movie? I think it's a comic book movie. I don't think you have to be based on a comic book to be a comic book movie. Clearly, Sam Raimi was trying to make a comic book movie. He just, in a way, he unburdened himself from the nerd blowback by not having source material to wreck, and by coming up
he
with
said he would have made a comic book movie if he'd had the IP. He just couldn't get the IP.
Yeah.
So he did his own, right? Like,
and I think fairly successful. It's probably about 40% crazier than it needs to be, and about 60% more violent than it needs to be. But for me, that 100% works. But like I said, there'll be a few people out there who will say, "Oh, I've never heard of Darkman. I should watch that." And they will watch it, and they will think you and I are fucking insane. But I will 100% stand by the fact that it is clearly, head and shoulders, the best movie out of this group of 6. And if you should decide to bless me and do another episode of Rank and Review, I promise that we will find a list for you that gives you some good things to say. Thank you so much, brother, for participating in another episode. Is there anything you would like to say to those kids on the internet before we call it a night?
Yeah, one of the things, and I always harp on this, I said it again in our last one, if you haven't checked it out, take the time to check out the DC animated work that's being done at their animated studios. They've done a bunch of feature-length stuff. Some of it's on Netflix. It rotates in and out. It's worth the time. They are putting out almost as good a movies in animated form as Marvel is putting out, and certainly better than the live-action DC stuff, which so far I have not seen a thing that I haven't in any way been impressed with.
Yeah. I think that animation is a really great medium for superheroes and comic books. Stuff that looks weird in a comic book will look less weird if it's animated, I think. Totally. So, make those stories more adult, and I'm on board. I'm on board. And so we get to the end of another fun-filled episode of Rank and Review. And yes, Brock Knudsen, it looks like he's going to be my superhero / comic book guy. We're going to take on 6 X-Men movies when next we speak. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope you guys have feedback to send me. And if you do, you send it to rankandreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. Also, you can find the show on Facebook, and you can find the show on iTunes. If you leave me a positive review on iTunes, that's super helpful for me. And if you give me a like and leave a message under your favorite episode on Facebook, that's super great for my morale. Please keep listening to Rank and Review, and please tell that other movie fan in your life about Rank and Review, because it's here and it's waiting for them.